The sky over the Pacific Ocean cracked open like a broken window, and out of that crack came ships the size of small mountains. They did not roar. They did not blast fire. They simply appeared, silent and smooth, hanging in the clouds as if they had always belonged there. Birds scattered. Fishing boats turned their engines hard and fled toward the coast. Within minutes, every phone on the planet buzzed with the same warning. Unknown aircraft detected, origin unknown, size unknown, intent unknown. Commander Drow stood at the front window of his flagship, arms crossed behind his back, watching the blue and green world grow larger. He was tall for his kind, with pale gray skin and eyes like dark glass. His people, the vast Dominion, came from a small planet called Ovex, a world so light that a grown Voss soldier could jump 3 times his own height without trying. Drow had spent his whole life on that world, and later, years traveling between other light worlds his people had conquered. Earth was different. His scientists had studied it for 2 years before the fleet ever arrived, and every single report said the same thing. Gravity nearly double our own, said Sub-Commander Oren, standing beside him, reading from a data pad. Their bones must be thick and slow. Their movements will be heavy. Their reflexes weak. Drow smiled at that. It was not a kind smile. Then this will be short, he said. A species crushed under its own world cannot fight a species built for the stars. He had seen this before. 3 other worlds, 3 other species, all beaten quickly because Voss soldiers were fast, light, and used to moving in ways their enemies never could. Earth, according to every chart and every graph his scientists had drawn, would be no different, maybe even easier. A heavy world meant weak legs. Weak legs meant no chase, no defense, no real fight at all. Down below, in a city that did not matter to Drow yet, but soon would, a man named Daniel Reyes was standing on the roof of a parking garage with a pair of binoculars pressed to his eyes. He was not a soldier by trade. Before the ships came, he had spent 15 years working construction, pouring concrete, carrying steel beams up unfinished stairwells, and hauling equipment that most men refused to lift twice. When the emergency call went out for anyone with physical training to report to the nearest defense center, Daniel had gone, not because he wanted glory, but because his neighborhood was still out there, and someone had to stand between it and whatever was coming. Beside him stood Captain Layla Nasser, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, who had been placed in charge of the scattered defense unit thrown together in the chaos of the last 3 days. She lowered her own binoculars and let out a slow breath. "They're not attacking yet," she said. "They're watching. Same as us. Maybe they're deciding if we're worth the trouble," Daniel said. "Maybe," Layla answered. "Or maybe they already decided, and this is just them taking their time to enjoy it." Daniel didn't answer that. He kept watching the ships hang silently in the sky, thinking about all the disaster movies he'd seen as a kid, where the aliens always came down guns blazing. These ships weren't doing that. They were patient, calm, almost lazy about the whole thing. That patience worried him more than fire would have. 3 hours later, one of the smaller ships broke away from the fleet and descended toward the edge of the city, landing in an open field with barely a sound. Metal legs unfolded beneath it, planting into the earth like a spider settling into place. Doors opened, and out came shapes in heavy suits, moving with a strange stiffness, as if their bodies did not agree with the ground beneath them. Drow was among them, walking down the ramp in his own reinforced suit, built specifically to handle Earth's gravity without wearing out his muscles too quickly. He had trained for this, of course, but even trained, his steps were careful, testing, like a man walking on ice for the first time. His soldiers moved the same way behind him, stepping slow and deliberate, adjusting to a world that pulled at them twice as hard as their own ever had. He looked around at the wide field, the distant buildings, the humans gathering cautiously behind fences and vehicles far away, watching without approaching. Everything about this world felt heavier, thicker, harder to move through. And in that heaviness, Drow saw exactly what his scientists had predicted. If his own trained soldiers, wrapped in gravity-assist suits, still struggled to move naturally here, then the native species, without any such technology, must be crawling through their lives like insects stuck in wet sand. "Send the signal," Drow said to Oren. "Tell their leaders we wish to speak. Tell them we come only to discuss the terms of their surrender." Orin hesitated for just a moment. And if they refuse to meet? Drow's smile returned, colder this time. They won't refuse. A crushed people always want to talk before they die. Far away, watching through binoculars from the parking garage roof, Daniel lowered his hands slowly as the alien ship finished landing. Something about the way those soldiers walked stuck with him. Careful, slow, unsure of their own footing. He didn't know why yet, but it felt important. They're not as comfortable here as they want us to think, he said quietly. Layla glanced at him. What makes you say that? Just a feeling, Daniel said. But I've carried enough weight in my life to recognize when someone's struggling to carry theirs. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single observation would matter more than anything else said or thought that day. Word of the meeting spread through the makeshift command center faster than anyone could control. Screens lit up with maps, radio channels overlapped with shouting, and somewhere in the back of the room, a coffee machine no one remembered turning on kept dripping into an empty pot. Captain Layla Nasser stood in the middle of it all, arms folded, listening to three people talk over each other at once, and finally raised her hand for silence. The aliens want to meet, she said. Neutral ground, open field, no weapons larger than sidearms. They say they want to discuss terms. Terms of what? Someone asked. Our surrender, Layla said flatly. Their words, not mine. The room went quiet at that. Daniel Reyes stood near the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. He had been given a role in the response unit almost by accident, thrown into it because he could lift things other men couldn't and because he didn't panic easily. He wasn't a negotiator. He wasn't even officially a soldier. But when Layla asked for volunteers to stand as part of the security escort for the meeting, his hand went up before he even finished thinking about it. The meeting was set for the next morning, in an open field just outside the city, far enough from buildings that neither side could claim ambush. When Daniel arrived with the rest of the small human delegation, the alien ship was already there, its ramp down, its soldiers standing in two neat rows like they were posing for a photograph no one would ever take. Commander Drow walked out last, flanked by Orin and two heavily armored guards. He moved slowly across the field, each step measured, careful, the same stiff caution Daniel had noticed the day before. But this time, up close, Daniel could see something else too. Drow's eyes moved constantly, scanning the humans, sizing them up the way a butcher looks at meat before deciding where to cut. You are the ones who speak for this world, Drow asked. His voice carried through a small device on his suit that translated his words into rough, clipped English. We speak for this region, Layla answered carefully. No one person speaks for the whole planet yet. Drow's mouth curled into something that might have been amusement. Yet, interesting word. As if you believe there will be time for that to change. We believe in a lot of things, Layla said. Right now, we're mostly interested in why your ships are sitting over our cities. Drow began to walk in a slow circle around the small group of humans, his hands folded behind his back, studying them like specimens in a display case. You live under gravity nearly double what my body was built for, he said. Even in my suit, I feel its pull with every step. And you, without any such protection, walk beneath it every day of your short lives. He stopped and looked directly at Layla. Do you know what that means for a species, Captain? It means you are crushed before you are even born. Weak hearts, weak legs, bodies built low and slow because your world refuses to let you rise. A few of the humans behind Layla shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Drow seemed to enjoy the silence. On my world, he continued, children run faster than your fastest soldiers by the time they can walk. We do not struggle against our own ground. We move with it, not through it. He raised a hand toward the sky, toward the ships still hanging silently above the clouds. This is not cruelty, understand. This is simply what happens when one species is shaped by ease, and another by struggle they cannot escape. I do not blame you for what your planet made you. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, but he kept his face still. He thought about years of his life spent hauling concrete bags up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again, about the ache in his shoulders every night, about waking up and doing it all again the next morning without complaint, because that was simply the work. He didn't feel crushed. He felt used to it. Layla kept her voice steady. You're assuming a lot about a species you've barely studied. I have studied you for 2 years, Drow said. Every measurement confirms itself. You are here to discuss terms because you know, somewhere beneath your pride, that resistance is pointless. My fleet can level your cities from orbit before your governments even agree on who should answer my call." He paused, letting the threat settle over the field like a heavy fog. "You have one day. Surrender your weapons, your defenses, your command structures, and my people will spare your cities the fire raining down. Refuse, and we begin with the largest one." No one answered right away. The wind moved across the open field, carrying dust between the two groups. Drow watched them, clearly expecting fear, expecting the kind of broken silence that came before surrender on every other world he had conquered. That was when Daniel stepped forward, out of line, without being asked, without permission from Layla or anyone else. Every alien soldier's weapon shifted slightly in his direction. Orin's hand moved toward his sidearm. Drow simply raised an eyebrow, curious more than afraid, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly decided to speak. "You said something wrong," Daniel said, his voice calm, almost conversational, as if he were correcting a coworker on a job site rather than addressing the commander of an invasion fleet. "You said our gravity crushes us before we're even born." Drow tilted his head slightly. "And you disagree?" "I do," Daniel said. "I think you've got it backwards." The field went very still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Drow's guards waited for a word from their commander. But Drow only stood there, studying this one human who had stepped forward uninvited, unarmed, and completely unafraid, in a way none of the others had. "Backwards," Drow repeated slowly, testing the word. "Explain." Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he simply started walking. Nobody in that field had ever seen someone walk toward Commander Drow like that before. Not fast, not slow, not stiff with fear. Just steady, one boot in front of the other, pressing into the dirt with a weight that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than muscle. Daniel Reyes crossed the open space between the two groups without hurrying, his eyes fixed on Drow the whole time, his arms loose at his sides. The alien guards raised their weapons halfway, waiting for a command that never came. Drow lifted one hand, a small, lazy gesture, and the guards lowered their aim again, though they kept watching. He wanted to see this. Whatever this was, it amused him enough to let it continue. "You walk slowly," Drow said as Daniel closed the distance. "Just as I said. Heavy, burdened. I walk like this because I choose to," Daniel said. "Not because I can't do it faster." Orin, standing a step behind his commander, studied Daniel's boots pressing into the ground. Something about the way the dirt shifted under each step bothered him, though he couldn't yet say why. He glanced down at the sensors built into his own suit, small readings meant to track vibration and impact, and frowned at a number that seemed slightly too high for a single unarmored man walking casually across a field. Daniel stopped only a few feet from Drow, close enough now that the commander had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. Up close, Drow could see the human clearly for the first time. Sun-worn skin, rough hands, a body that carried no extra softness anywhere, built through years of labor rather than any training designed for war. Nothing about him looked impressive by Voss standards. And yet something about the way he stood, feet planted firm and even, shoulders relaxed but ready, made Drow's easy amusement shift, just slightly, into something closer to curiosity. "You said our gravity should have crushed us before we were even born," Daniel said. "I think you got that backwards. I think it built us instead." Drow almost laughed. "Built you into what? A slower, weaker version of what my soldiers already are." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Every single day, since before any of us can remember, this planet has been trying to pull us down. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat has had to work against that pull. Doesn't matter if you're walking to school or carrying your groceries up the stairs. The weight is always there. And it never lets up. Not for a second, not for one day of your whole life." "That sounds like suffering," Drow said. "A cruel design." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe it's just training we never got to opt out of." He reached out, almost casually, and placed his hand on the metal support strut jutting out from the base of the alien landing ramp nearby, a thick beam meant to anchor the ship against strong winds. It was built for a lighter world, engineered with less need for raw strength, thinner than it looked at first glance. Daniel didn't grip it hard. He barely leaned any real weight into it at all. But the metal groaned softly under even that light touch, a low, uneasy sound that made two of the nearby guards glance over sharply. Drow's eyes narrowed at the sound. He said nothing, but his gaze shifted from the strut to Daniel's hand, then slowly back up to his face. "You misunderstand what strength means," Drow said, though his voice had lost a little of its earlier certainty. "One man leaning against a support beam proves nothing." "You're right," Daniel said. "It doesn't. Not by itself." He pulled his hand back and let it fall to his side again. "But it's not really about me, is it? It's about every single person on this planet who's grown up under the same weight I have. Farmers, builders, soldiers, mothers carrying their kids up hills because the car broke down again. None of us got a choice about the gravity we were born into. We just learned to live inside it, every day, without ever getting a break from it." Oren stepped closer to Drow's side, speaking low enough that only his commander could hear. "Sir, the reading from that beam was not what our models predicted. The stress mark on the metal is minor, but it should not exist at all from a light touch like that." Drow's jaw tightened slightly, though his face remained composed for the humans watching. He had studied Earth for 2 years through instruments and reports, numbers on a screen, graphs drawn by scientists who had never once set foot on this planet themselves. Numbers that all pointed toward one clean conclusion: heavier gravity meant weaker bodies. It was true on every other world his fleet had ever conquered. It had never once been wrong before. "You speak with confidence," Drow said to Daniel, choosing his next words more carefully now. "But confidence is not proof. Words are easy. Anyone can claim strength they do not have." "Then don't take my word for it," Daniel said simply. "Test it." For the first time since the ships had appeared in Earth's sky, something flickered across Drow's expression that wasn't quite arrogance and wasn't quite doubt either. It sat somewhere uncomfortably between the two, an old certainty suddenly forced to make room for a question it had never needed to ask before. Captain Layla Nasser, watching from where the human delegation stood, saw that flicker too, and understood immediately what kind of opportunity it might be. She stepped forward slowly, careful not to break whatever strange balance had settled over the field. "If you want proof," she said, "we can give you proof. Right here, right now." Drow turned to look at her, then back at Daniel, then finally at the trembling metal strut still humming faintly from the touch of a single unimpressive-looking human hand. "Very well," Drow said at last, his voice quieter than before. "Show me." A crate was brought out from the belly of the alien ship, carried by 2 Voss soldiers who moved with obvious effort despite their exosuits whining softly to assist them. It was a supply container, standard issue for their fleet, built from a dense alloy used to protect equipment during rough landings. Oren read off the listed weight from his data pad in a flat voice, then translated the number into terms the humans could understand. "Just over 400 pounds, Layla repeated, glancing at Daniel. "You sure about this?" "I've carried worse up a scaffold," Daniel said. "This one's got handles." Drow watched the exchange with his arms folded, his earlier confidence rebuilding itself as he studied the crate. 400 pounds was nothing extraordinary for a Voss soldier wearing proper equipment, but it was heavy enough that no unarmored, untrained body should manage it easily, especially not while fighting against gravity nearly double what that body was evolved for. This test, he decided, would settle things quickly and put the matter to rest. "2 of my soldiers will lift it first," Drow said, "so you understand the standard we are comparing against." 2 Voss soldiers stepped forward, their suits humming as motors engaged to assist their limbs. Even with that mechanical help, their movements were tense, careful, muscles straining visibly beneath their gear as they gripped the handles and lifted the crate only a few inches off the ground before setting it back down, breathing hard through the small vents in their helmets. "Their suits are doing most of that work," Daniel said quietly to Layla. "I know," she said, "which means whatever you do next needs to matter." Daniel stepped up to the crate, rolled his shoulders once, and crouched down the way he had 1,000 times before on job sites, knees bent, back straight, hands finding the handles with practiced ease. He didn't rush it. He breathed out slowly, planted his feet, and lifted. The crate came up off the ground steadily. No shaking, no strain visible on his face beyond the natural effort of the movement itself. He held it for a moment, adjusted his grip slightly, then walked 3 full steps forward before setting it down again, gently, without dropping it or letting it slam into the dirt. Silence spread across the field. Even the wind seemed to hold still. That is not possible, one of the Voss soldiers muttered, still catching his breath from his own attempt. Oren was already checking his data pad, running the numbers again as if he expected to find an error somewhere. Sir, the human's body mass is well below our own average. There is no equipment assisting him. No suit, no mechanical support of any kind. Drow said nothing for a long moment, staring at the crate, then at Daniel, who stood there with his chest rising and falling from normal effort, not exhaustion. This did not match anything in the reports Drow had studied for 2 years. Every prior model, drawn from careful observation of Earth's environment and rough estimates of its biology, had predicted exactly the opposite outcome. One demonstration proves little, Drow said finally, though the certainty in his voice had thinned considerably. Perhaps this one human is simply unusual among his kind. An outlier. Nothing more. Daniel wiped his palms on his pants and looked over at Layla. She gave him a small nod, understanding immediately what he was thinking. There's a lot of us like this, Daniel said. I'm not special. I just did construction work most of my life. There's farmers on this planet who move heavier things than this crate every single morning before breakfast. There's people carrying injured friends out of collapsed buildings during earthquakes, running the whole way. This isn't rare, Commander. This is just what happens to a body raised under conditions your soldiers only just started training for. Oren, still studying his readings, spoke up carefully, choosing his words with more caution than before. Sir, if this is common among their species rather than exceptional, our combat models may need to be reconsidered entirely. Drow's expression tightened at that, a flicker of something close to frustration crossing his face before he mastered it again. He had built his entire strategy for this invasion, his entire fleet's approach, on the assumption that Earth's gravity would work in his favor, wearing down any resistance before it ever truly began. It had worked that way on every other world his people had conquered. It had never failed before. A single test proves nothing, he said again, more to himself than to anyone else. We will test further. A harder measure. Not strength alone, but endurance. Let us see how long this heaviness your world gave you can truly last before it breaks you down. Layla stepped forward slightly. What kind of test did you have in mind? Drow turned toward the open land stretching beyond the field, rough terrain rising into low hills in the distance, uneven ground littered with rock and brush. A distance, he said. On foot. No stopping, no assistance, no shortcuts. My soldiers will walk it in their suits, built for exactly this kind of endurance. Your human will walk it without anything at all. He looked back at Daniel, something colder returning to his gaze now, a commander who did not enjoy being surprised twice in one day. Let us see which of us truly understands what your gravity has done to your kind. Daniel glanced at the hills, then back at Drow, unbothered. Sounds fair, he said. Lead the way. Oren quietly recalculated the numbers on his data pad one more time, but this time, he didn't share the result out loud. Something in his readings had already told him how this next test was likely to end, and he wasn't sure his commander was ready to hear it yet. The hills beyond the field looked easy from a distance, soft green slopes rolling gently under the afternoon sun. Up close, they were something else entirely. Loose rock shifted underfoot with every step. Dry brush caught at ankles. The ground rose and dipped without warning, forcing legs to work at odd angles that no flat training field ever prepared a body for. Drow chose this path deliberately, a stretch of rough terrain nearly 6 miles long, ending at a ridge that overlooked the whole valley. 6 miles of uneven ground, under a gravity his own soldiers still hadn't fully adjusted to, even with their suits working overtime to help them. No stopping, Drow reminded everyone gathered at the starting point. No assistance. First to the ridge proves the point. Anyone who cannot finish proves it as well. 4 Voss soldiers lined up, their exosuits humming quietly, joints flexing with small motorized clicks as they prepared. Daniel stood a short distance away, stretching his shoulders once, rolling his neck, dressed in nothing but his regular clothes and a pair of worn work boots that had already seen 1,000 miles of harder ground than this. You don't have to prove anything else today, Layla said quietly, standing beside him. You've already made your point back there. Maybe, Daniel said, but he's not convinced yet. And if he's not convinced, this doesn't end here. Might as well finish it properly. Drow raised a hand, and the walk began. The Voss soldiers moved quickly at first, their suits pushing them forward with mechanical strength, covering ground fast, confident, and sure. Daniel started at his own pace, steady and unhurried, the same rhythm he had carried across countless job sites over the years, boots finding solid footing before committing his weight forward, breathing controlled and even. Within the first mile, the gap between them looked wide. The soldiers were already far ahead, climbing the first low hill with mechanical ease. Orin walked alongside Drow near the starting line, watching through a pair of long-range viewing lenses. "They are moving well," he noted. "As expected," Drow said, though his eyes kept drifting toward the small figure walking steadily behind the group, never rushing, never slowing either. By the second mile, something began to shift. The suits, built for smooth environments and light gravity assistance, started struggling against the uneven terrain, motors working harder to compensate for constant shifts in footing, drawing more power than intended. One soldier stumbled on loose rock, his suit jerking awkwardly to catch his balance, costing him precious seconds. Another began breathing heavily through his helmet vents, the strain of fighting both the terrain and the unfamiliar gravity finally catching up to muscles that had never been tested this way before. Daniel kept walking. Same pace, same steady breath. He crossed the first hill without pause, adjusting his stride naturally to the slope, the kind of adjustment that came from years of instinct rather than any conscious effort. He didn't think about the gravity pulling at him. He had never known anything else. It was simply the ground beneath his feet, the same as it had always been. By the third mile, the gap had closed considerably. Two of the Voss soldiers had fallen behind the others, their suits overheating slightly from the extended strain, forcing them to slow their pace to avoid a full system failure. The lead soldier pushed on, determined, but his movements had lost their earlier smoothness, becoming stiffer, more forced, muscles beneath his suit clearly fatiguing despite the mechanical assistance. Drow watched the growing distance readings on Orin's data pad with a tightening jaw. This was not supposed to happen. His soldiers were trained for exactly this kind of endurance test, built for it, equipped for it. And yet the numbers kept shifting in a direction he didn't want to see. By the fourth mile, Daniel passed the two struggling soldiers without a word, his pace unchanged, his breathing still even. He didn't gloat. He didn't slow down to make a point. He simply kept walking, the same steady rhythm carrying him forward across ground that had taken more out of the alien soldiers than either side had expected. "This is not possible," Orin murmured, more to himself than to his commander, watching the numbers on his screen. "Our models accounted for gravity resistance affecting endurance negatively. They did not account for this." Drow said nothing, his eyes fixed on the ridge in the distance, watching the small human figure continue his climb without any sign of slowing. By the fifth mile, only one Voss soldier remained near the front, and even he had slowed considerably, his suit's power reserves dropping faster than anticipated from the constant strain of fighting terrain his body was never truly built for. Daniel drew even with him. Then, without any burst of speed or dramatic effort, simply continued past him at the same pace he had held the entire way. The lead soldier didn't have the strength left to respond, his legs burning beneath layers of mechanical support that had promised to carry him through exactly this kind of challenge, and instead had barely managed to keep him upright. Daniel reached the ridge first, arriving with his breathing only slightly elevated, sweat on his brow, but nothing more than what 6 miles of hard walking under a hot sun would naturally produce. He turned and looked back down the slope, watching the remaining soldiers still struggling through the final stretch, their suits whirring louder now, straining audibly against fatigue their designers had never planned for. Down at the starting line, Drow lowered the viewing lenses slowly, his face unreadable for a long moment. "Sir," Orin said quietly. The human did not slow once. Not a single time across the entire distance. Drow didn't answer right away. He thought back to every report his scientists had drawn, every clean graph predicting weakness, every confident briefing that had convinced him Earth would fall as easily as the worlds before it. None of it had accounted for what he had just watched happen on that hillside. A body built not despite constant hardship, but because of it, tempered by a weight it had never once been allowed to escape. "Call them back," Drow said finally, his voice quieter than it had been all day. "The test is finished." He turned toward Layla, who stood watching him with careful, measured patience. And for the first time since his ships had appeared over Earth's sky, Commander Drow did not smirk at all. "I wish to speak with your soldier," he said. "Alone, if that is possible. There are things I clearly do not yet understand about your world." The tent set up for the private meeting was small, meant for storing equipment rather than hosting conversations between species, but it offered enough shade and quiet for what needed to happen next. Inside, a single table sat between two simple chairs, brought in from one of the human trucks. Drow sat on one side, his suit powered down now, resting rather than fighting the pull of a world that no longer felt quite as hostile to him as it had that morning. Orin stood near the entrance, arms folded, listening without interrupting. Across from Drow sat Daniel, still slightly damp with sweat from the walk, a bottle of water in his hand that Layla had brought him before stepping just outside to give the conversation room to breathe. For a long moment, no one spoke. Drow studied Daniel's face, searching for something he couldn't quite name, some sign of the arrogance he had expected from a species he'd assumed was already broken by its own world. "I have conquered 3 other worlds," Drow said finally. "Each one weaker than my own people, each one falling within days of first contact. My models predicted the same result here. Heavier gravity, weaker inhabitants. A simple equation that had never once failed. Numbers on a page don't always tell the whole story," Daniel said, turning the water bottle slowly in his hands. "Clearly not," Drow admitted, and something in his voice sounded almost tired, the weight of 2 years of confident planning settling uncomfortably now that it had proven wrong. "Explain it to me. Not as a boast. I want to understand." Daniel thought about it for a moment before answering. "You built your whole strategy assuming gravity only takes something away. Speed, maybe. Ease of movement. But it doesn't just take, it also gives. Every single day of our lives, since before we can even remember, this planet pulls at us. Doesn't matter if you're strong or weak when you're born. That pull doesn't care. It just keeps pulling. So your body either learns to handle it, or it doesn't survive very long at all. Over enough time, enough generations, that pull shapes everyone. Strong hearts to move blood against it. Strong legs to carry weight through it. Bones dense enough to hold a body together under constant pressure. We didn't choose that. We just grew up inside it. The same way a tree grows strong roots to survive a storm it can't escape." Drow leaned back slightly in his chair, absorbing that. "On my world, we grew soft instead. Light gravity meant less resistance. Less resistance meant less need to build strength most creatures never used. Doesn't make your people weak," Daniel said. "Just built different. You're fast. Quick reflexes. Probably better with fine movement than we are. That's not nothing. It's just not the same kind of strength you were expecting to find here." Orin spoke up from near the entrance, his voice careful. "Sir, if I may, this changes more than just today's outcome. Our entire invasion doctrine assumes physical weakness on heavier worlds. If that assumption is false here, it may be false elsewhere as well. Worlds we dismissed as unworthy of full attention may hold populations far more capable than we assumed." Drow was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the table between himself and Daniel. 2 years of preparation, an entire fleet mobilized, all built on a foundation that had just cracked apart in the space of a single afternoon. "I came here prepared to conquer a broken people," Drow said finally. "Instead, I find a people forged by the very thing I believed had ruined them." He looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes directly. "That is not a small mistake to have made." "No," Daniel agreed. "It's not." Outside the tent, Layla waited with careful patience, watching the fleet still hanging silently in the sky above, wondering how this conversation would end. When Drow finally stepped out, Orin close behind him, his posture had changed. The stiff confidence from that morning was gone, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. "Captain," Drow said, addressing Layla directly now, "I am recalling the bombardment order. There will be no attack on your cities, not today, not while this matter remains unresolved." Layla kept her expression steady, though relief moved through her chest like a held breath finally released. "And after today?" "After today," Drow said, "I believe there is more to discuss than terms of surrender, perhaps terms of understanding instead." He glanced back toward the tent, toward Daniel stepping out behind him, unhurried as always. "Your species was not what my reports promised. I would like to know what else those reports got wrong before my fleet makes any further decisions here. It wasn't peace, not yet, not fully. But it was something steadier than the threats that had opened that same morning, a small shift in a conversation that had begun with mockery and ended with something closer to respect. As the sun began sinking toward the hills Daniel had walked only hours before, he turned and started back toward the human encampment, his pace unchanged from before, steady, unhurried, the same walk that had carried him across 6 miles of rough terrain without ever slowing down. Drow watched him go, standing beside his ship, the confident smirk from that morning nowhere on his face anymore. He had come to Earth believing gravity was a punishment this world forced onto its people. Watching Daniel disappear into the distance, still walking at that same unbroken pace, Drow finally understood it had never been a punishment at all. It had been training, quiet and constant, running through every single life this planet had ever held, whether they noticed it happening or not. The commander did not smirk at Earth's gravity again after that day. He had finally understood what it had built.